Some progress on the log structure. We had put the protection on the sawmill that was lifted back off, and going really slowly when handling these things rather than break things. Tractor was put in place to power it. Then we could start working on a couple of short pieces we are using to make some of those in the corner where we don't require any long logs. We'll have plenty of struggling with long logs later on, so it was nice to, and we had struggled with a couple as you have seen, so it was nice with a couple of short logs for a change. All four of them were trimmed to size. We ended up having to go back up here to do a little more trimming on, I think it was one or maybe it was two of them. And we might look at revisiting this and reusing some of the leftover pieces, making something usable out of that also. And what can't be reused will, well, the really small pieces with mainly bark will probably just be burned in a pile, but if it's reusable at firewood it will be processed to that. So removing some bark. This tree has had some damage done to it and had a lot of the tree sap or resin oozing out of it. They talk about them using it for gum in the old days. I'm not sure how true that is, but it has kind of a nice little stingy taste to it. Or it's not really sweet in that sense as you think about gum and such. And then the parts were brought down and we started making the notches to get the pieces to fit. These are small enough that they are actually possible by hand to put in place, even if they are a lot heavier being fresh compared to the old dry grey wood when we reassembled the structure upside down. And as usual, the notch is too small and needs to go back up for some trimming, and then the underside of the top of the grey part here needed a little changing to accept all the bulges on the new log. So then the other side. Also needing a little trimming. And quite a bit of trimming, I think, on the old log here to access it. It was kind of built with round timber, a lot of it. If you build a better structure you have more of a V shape to the bottom, and in some places they had done V's. They had done this quickly, I guess, with as little effort as possible, because it was a storage shed. It wasn't meant for anything else, and I think if having firewood in there, it's actually quite good that it lets air circulate through it. So a sealed wall, it could have been even more airy and not be a problem. With the first two pieces we actually, here we had to go back up and trim the other two a tiny bit to get it to line up with accepting the last really long log that will be full length. We did adjust the two shorter logs for the next level above it before we put the longer side piece in place, and we had left the notches out, just made the surface good enough. Needed some trimming here also in places to get a decent fit, things not wobbling around too much. And the notches were a little bit too small as usual. It's a little tricky that the corners are at a little bit at angles. Then it was time to tackle the two really long logs. Luckily we only needed two of them, and we could find two that could be used. One had a slight bend to it, sadly. We put them both, one on the bench and one next to it, to start looking at it and seeing which should go where and how to cut these. This one was bent down a little at the first cut, so we had to put a little bit of space around it for it to not dip down too much, as it made contact with the saw blade and the rollers and stuff like that. And since it was outside of the feed range of the saw bench, we had to hand push it. And yes, I helped. My dad didn't do all the pulling. You can just see my shadow here at the end, until the bench, the feeding started grabbing and we could get it to go through. But we managed to finish the first really long one, and then it's about moving it over to that long cart we have to move the material around, and then put the new one in place, getting it as close to the blade as possible to maximize the length. It's still handwork, because this is the next really long one. Then we have one piece that my dad had messed up. He cut the notches in the wrong places, but we found a use for that a little later on. This one was a lot straighter, so we didn't need a support in the front for it to not to dip down. It was actually a really nice looking log, so it was a little easier to work with, but took a couple of pulls to do the first little bit on all the sides that required cutting, and it kind of shakes a little. But we managed to finish both of them and took them down to the work site, and then I had been able to borrow a different tools to remove the bark, and an axe was also used, because some of the where the branches come out were quite hard to take with the other tool. The one, well, it has been built with pretty much round logs, but we are adding a little bit of notching for better support, and it turned out to not be that great. We had to rework a lot of this later on, but clean things up with a sledgehammer and an axe, because I got kind of a ridge down in the middle of the valley. So, and here we had to take down the material in the old pieces quite a bit for some reason, for things to line up. We'll see. It's not perfect by any means, this work, but hopefully it will serve its purpose for many more years if we get it flipped around on a foundation. And then lifted one of the really long ones in place, and as usually we had to trim a little, and also where it mates with the other piece we had to do a little. This side was actually really good, not a whole lot of trimming needed, but on this side we had more work to bring it up and then down and back up and down. But eventually we had a fit good enough, and this is the back side will be when it's finished. And here we ended up doing some measurements, and here it's actually really good lines. So it was a little special, because this one should have been a little bit thicker toward the top end, because it falls all the way down in the notch, but it will be a little special with a spacer here. We put up that south part that just for fitment purpose. This is kind of a lip hanging down, so the foundation at that end will be a little lower, but it will also be free floating, no floor under here, because it's a wooden floor in the outhouse part of it. So we just removed that one as we had done a little test fitting. And the front side now, with the measurements we have, we will have to either break it apart again, and that's not happening. So we will look at making the foundation a little bit slanted, a couple of 5-6 centimeters from north to south, so to offset that difference. And in the north end we reused a piece my dad had misjudged, or kind of cut the notches in the wrong places, and made a triangular like fitment piece to fill the gap at the bottom of this end, because it will be on a concrete foundation when we turn it back over. So then this fills up the void that would have been here. And we looked at lifting the entire lower section, the entire level of this, and of course the camera cut out as we started lifting, but we spent some time rigging and getting the pull to be correct, and it lifted off nicely. So, and my dad had put supports on the inside, plenty of them, so now we have the template for the foundation.